Okay,
We're here.
we are here. So, this is going to be my first ever podcast episode, both with a video and with a guest. So, thank you. Thank
Thank you.
for joining me for that and for trusting. And hopefully, I know we just fitted with some settings and with some audio and different things like that. So, there may be a hiccup or two. We'll see. Hopefully, not. Hopefully, we've said that, knock on wood, and it's not a thing.
Yes.
I want to thank you, Lauren, for being here with me today and joining me. I've been listening to your podcast. I think I listened to yours even before I started my own.
Oh,
Hmm.
thank you.
It's really cool to see and really cool watching sort of your evolution through that as well and listening to the podcast. So I don't want to take too much away from you. I think I'll turn it over to you in just a second just to kind of introduce yourself and your podcast, and then we'll kind of go from there. But Lauren has a podcast in very similar space, health and wellness as well. And it initially started with a focus on grief, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there's so much alignment, so many of the things that we're talking about that we wanted to kind of get together and chat and just there's a few specific things we thought we'd talk about, but we'll see how it evolves from there. So, Lauren, if you want to go ahead and introduce your podcast and just a little bit about you.
Thank you. I'm excited. I feel honored to be like your first video and collab on podcasting. So my name's Lauren Gilhula. My podcast is called Living on Lemonade with Lauren. And yes, it originally started as kind of an outlet and a way to share and express my own grief journey. The idea came to me not long after my dad passed away from cancer in 2022, and I just started feeling this nudge to start recording and just sharing the my entire grief journey, which really started when I was 12 and I lost a childhood friend close to me. And so that's where it started, and it's evolved into more topics, and a lot of it I think is just me sitting down and sharing kind of what's been on my mind or what I've been observing in life, especially if it's kind of metaphorical to kind of spiritual concepts and how grief weaves through just everyday life and how it's different in some seasons and just expressing that and trying to bring this topic into the open and having kind of conversations like making bringing some normalcy, I guess, to it. So yeah, that's kind of been the vision and where it's been going.
Well, I really love that because I think something that people are very challenged with, and I know myself included, is how to talk about grief, how to support somebody when they're going through it. I lost a friend, and it was my first experience losing a friend and somebody who wasn't, outside of my circle or one of my grandparents or a distant relative or somebody you hear about and this was when I was about 27 or 28 and she was 26. And that just, it really, really hit home. And it, it was really confronting in terms of our mortality
Yes.
and not knowing what to say. And even just she was in the hospital leading up to that, and she knew that it was coming, and just talking to her about it so openly, and then how it felt for me. Here I am, and I had, a young baby, and just directly life and death right in front of me. And then talking to people about it. And then, even for that, actually, we were close, close friends from work, and then we had kind of pulled apart a little bit, and we had just started to come back together. And there was this weird thing too with it where I find with grief too sometimes, because it hits everybody so different. And I almost felt like I don't know how to act with this. You know what I mean? I don't know how to reach out to her family because I wanted to do something, but then you don't know. what's appropriate, how to speak, what to ask for, or if there's people coming out of the woodworks, right, that you haven't
Yeah.
spoken to in forever, and I'm like, am I stepping on the toes of somebody who's maybe a lot closer, but this still impacted me, but am I now making this about me instead of about the family? And it was this whole weird thing, and we've known even in the last few years some other people that have passed, unfortunately, some very tragic circumstances. And so I think it's something that I remember you did like a post or an episode or something at some point talking about like the things you should say to somebody when they've lost somebody. And I really specifically remember that. I don't know if it was an Instagram video or reel or something, but that was really, really helpful because I feel like, you don't know what to do, what to say in those scenarios, what's appropriate. And even just in the last few years, our life has changed a lot. Something I haven't gotten into on the podcast yet that I will in a later episode. But through that, there's been a lot of grief in terms of just life changes, right? And
Mhm.
that can be so many things beyond just death, and just understanding what that looks like or even how to talk about it. So I really, really appreciate your podcast for that. Sorry, I want to ask you a bunch of questions, but I just wanted to kind of get into some of that,
Absolutely.
because we didn't talk about this as much before, but this is something I really wanted to talk about on the podcast with you and how we view and how we look at that. And then something that we were talking about before this episode and this recording was spiritual awakenings
Yeah.
and kind of what that looks like. And I think that those are a really interesting intersection because I do think that that loss and massive life changes and crisis can also be a bit of a catalyst sometimes to how you view life and how you view sort of just your perspective on everything, even having a baby, like I feel like my spiritual awakening came on with having kids and the loss of myself
Yeah.
as an individual person and becoming a mom and then not knowing who I was anymore and then being responsible for this person and all of the change that kind of came with that. And there's grieving involved in that, but then there's also guilt because you shouldn't be grieving when you have this beautiful thing to celebrate. And it's so many mixed emotions, which I imagine is very similar when you're going through grief, that you want to celebrate that person's life, but you also are grieving the change and like all of that. So I don't know if you want to take it from there, if that kind of sparked anything that you'd like to get into.
Yeah, there's so many great points there. And I absolutely resonate with the big life changes is very often a catalyst. You hear it all the time when you talk to people about their experiences and kind of certain things happen in our lives and it's like I call it like dark night of the soul. You can't go back. Like your life is forever changed and there's no like you can't go back to how it was. And that's not just losing someone, it's yeah, it's parenthood, it's changes in relationships. Um, and then you end up in this space of like, well, I'm not who I was, and I don't know who I am in the present or who I'm going to become. So from the kind of spiritual standpoint, yeah, that's a whole journey, right? Um, and then I'm kind of blanking for a sec, but before that, we were talking about grief and can you just refresh me for a second?
Yeah,
Came off night, so my brain's a
I
little
know, I know. I
like
feel like we're gonna jump all over with this.
we're
There's so
gonna
many
be
things ebbing and flowing. There's so many things that we did get into beforehand too, that I was like, okay, we have to save this and talk about this. But one thing for sure was grief, and we talked about too with your dad and with your friend how that affected you. But something that was interesting, and I know this is maybe even adding more to the pot, but I didn't know this until we were talking the last time that you grew up very spiritual.
yes.
You grew up, which is very different from my upbringing, right? I grew up Roman Catholic with pretty conservative parents that came from a very small town up north. Um, and to them, not anymore, but to them, tarot and Reiki and all that stuff is like voodoo.
Yeah.
Even my husband, that was the case too. He's worried I was going to bring in like evil spirits, but you grew up around that. Like you actually, I don't know if you feel comfortable even just talking a little bit about how you grew up and how maybe that has shifted and changed over the years in terms of your perspective with the spiritual community and how that's changed with grief as well.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, for sure. So from my experience, spiritualism and kind of a lot of what comes with that has always been part of my life. And if I understand it correctly from before my time, well, I know that my parents used to, when they lived in a different town, like I was born in Windsor, lived in Amherstburg for 6 months, so I moved to Cambridge. They were Anglican, went to church like I think most Sundays. My mom was very active in the church, and then it kind of fell off when they moved. But from my understanding, I think they met an artist. I think her name's Bev Spicer, and she kind of introduced them to some of the spiritual concepts. And so my parents were kind of curious about that. And that would have been in the early 90s. So just, you know, being born in the late 80s, just very impressionable. So once they were starting to get into some of this stuff, meditations, just kind of spiritual concepts, Reiki. Both my parents did their level 1 and 2. My sisters have some of their Reiki levels as well. So I just remember these conversations around that and stuff and like I fractured my wrist when I was 6 and my dad would do Reiki on my wrist at night and it healed really quickly. So that was great, maybe a little faster than what would be kind of typical. So and I remember my dad like burning sage on Sundays sometimes, and he used to lead a meditation group and he'd do seminars on spiritualism and whatnot. So all of this stuff was normal for me, and I embraced like pieces of it, but it wasn't until later that I really kind of wanted to go deeper into topics that I'd maybe heard of, but had never really gone into very far. And it was actually when I started doing yoga that I kind of, this world opened up to me more and I became more curious about like Buddhism and some of the concepts there and just as a lifestyle and then getting into like crystals and so I mean I had crystals like as a kid and then when my friend Nicole died when I was 12 my mom bought me 2 oracle decks but at the time I didn't really know what the intention there was or how to use them. So they were just these kind of pretty decks. But she told me later, well, it was to help you with your grief. But we obviously didn't have that conversation. I didn't remember, or maybe I would have been a little bit more interactive with them. But I still have them and they're still very special to me. So it's been it's I would say it's helped my grief journey to have already had kind of a foundation in these things, especially since after losing my dad, life just it just changed like in an instant, right? And so it was very nice to have spiritualism or whatever you want to call it as a bit of a soft landing pad, even if I hadn't taken it to the depths I have since. It was nice to already kind of have that foundation and be able to lean back on it and it be a place of comfort and
How
with
did
my
you find that
grief.
it comforted you? I'm just curious because some people, I don't know if I should say some people, but grief in general, it can make people more spiritual sometimes or less, right?
That's right.
I've seen it go kind of both ways, and I'm curious in what way for you it was comforting.
I think just because I believe in an afterlife, I believe that we can still be connected energetically with our loved ones and we can still receive signs and symbols from them, connect in meditation and just feel their presence, get a message from them and wisdom on how to God, like they're still I believe that they're still continuing to guide us through life in the most loving way and I use the word like heart hugs when I see something that I immediately think of that loved one. So for like Nicole, it's monarch butterflies, right? So when you have that moment and it's just like very obvious and in your face, it's just like, oh, you just have it, it almost just stops you in your tracks for a moment. You just have like a, oh, thank you. Or a song comes on that reminds you of them. So it's been leaning into my beliefs as a way to stay connected with those who are no longer in the on the earth realm in the physical body so that I don't unravel and in my grief and just kind of fall into the depths. And that's not to say I didn't for a while there, because I totally did. And what I've come to understand through just a lot of deep work and introspection over the last few months is falling that deep into the darkness as I did after my dad's death, and just kind of the aftermath, because it wasn't even just his death. There was stuff that happened in the family, because as you know, like death can bring out the worst in people, and it really brought me to my knees. There were days that I was like, where's the eject button? Like, just launch me into the ethers. I don't want to be here anymore, because I don't want to, I don't want to be somewhere where my dad, like, I just wanted to be with him and everyone. So I went through that dark night 100%. Um, and where was I going with this? It's funny how you just like lose your train of thought.
Well, there's so many things that I'd like to touch on in there if you want to take a second to collect yourself and kind of go through some of that. But I don't know if you saw at one point I kind of touched my arms because I got
Yeah.
chills when you talked about that, when you talked about just feeling like they're still here. I know
Yeah.
maybe not everyone's going to believe in this. Maybe people listening to this podcast will. I do personally believe in reincarnation.
Yep.
I
Me
like to. I choose to. You know what I mean?
too.
Not in the sense the way that I was raised with an afterlife, with there being like a heaven. I personally see Earth as more of a heaven and hell, and you can kind of make it one
Yeah.
or the other.
The duality. Yeah.
It's figuring out how to work with those energies. And I do believe for sure that people are still with us, that we are all energy. You know, we're matter and then energy, and energy doesn't dissipate. Energy is still there. And so same
Right.
thing like you were saying with the butterfly. My friend who passed, I've got her photo on my fridge. And there, she loves sunflowers. So whenever I see sunflowers, think of her. Certain things that are yellow, sometimes dimes. I know her mom was finding them a lot. And
Yeah.
she's just such a
I remember
cheerful,
that.
cheery person. I get chills when I see them. And
Mhm.
also for her, it was oh, what was it? Rhodochrosite. So for whatever reason, this particular stone, and it's
Huh.
funny, I just was so drawn to it and having a moment with that, and then I looked up the meaning, and it's like the friendship stone, the friendship and love stone. I'm like,
Yeah.
that's so sweet. So I had a bracelet for that I wore for a little while, and I feel her presence there, not necessarily actively all the time, but just that she's still here with us. And to me, she was, oh my gosh, going to her celebration of life, there was hundreds of people. There's probably like 500 people there. Like the number of lives that she touched, and she was such a positive person. You know, she had her things. We all do. None of us are immune to being human.
Right.
But she just was such a positive person. I remember giving her a hard time for that sometimes, being like, you need to be a little bit more discerning, maybe. Maybe, but like actually, in hindsight, she taught me,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Like the lessons that I learned from her. But then when you're talking about that too with signs, I have that. I have it on my shoulder because when my grandma passed, I started seeing cardinals all the time, like
Mhm.
nonstop in different places, different cities. So I knew it wasn't the same cardinal, and literally flying in front of my path, like flying in
Oh,
front of me when I'm in the
wow.
car, flying in front of me when I was going for walks. It would happen 3 to 4 times a day in the 6 months after she passed, I'd say. And then it slowly dwindled a little bit. But it was happening a lot, a lot, a lot. And then with the tarot card readings that I do, I tell my clients when I'm working with them that, you know, you can see this how you want, but the way that it feels to me is this is your guides, this is your loved ones, this is your angels, however you want to view it. And I think it's a bit of each of those, and that there's a slight variation between each of them. But this is them like still sending messages. They're still here, they're still with you, they're still with us. You know, they're still part of this experience. And I don't know if for some people that's comforting or not. I have so many views on that. But that's my own personal, view. And I imagine that there are people listening to this. We know somebody who lost their partner, their close partner, really suddenly and unexpectedly just in the last few days. And so I know that there's probably some people listening to this that are grieving either a lost loved one, um,
Mm.
or a change in life. I've talked to so many people recently going through massive life changes that I think have come from COVID and from other things. Like there's just this huge shift that's happening. And I don't tend to get hyper spiritual in a lot of things. I do still
Yeah.
consider myself very analytical in a lot of ways, with the spirituality kind of infused in there. But there's so many things happening right now, astrologically and within the world. And there's so much change and upheaval and just kind of like shifting that's happening. And that's stirring the pot a little bit with things.
Yeah.
And then things are changing from that. I know in my life, but so many people around me are going in massive transitions right now because of that and what you said. I'm curious, what specific things were really helpful to you when you were grieving? Like you mentioned meditation, you mentioned other things that when you were going through that dark night of the soul, looking back now, what helped you the most?
That's a good question. Okay, I'm gonna take you on a little bit of a journey
Perfect. We're
because
here.
it all started when I was 12.
Yeah.
Um, and I'll like I've had and many people have had lots of loss. I'm one of them. I felt like I grieved my entire teenagehood, and that's probably why I was such a nightmare sometimes, but also just like hormones, right?
I don't remember you being a nightmare because we that's when we met was in high school.
Yeah.
Um, but
Just ask Jamie.
I know what
She'll
you
tell you.
yes.
So when I lost Nicole when we were 12, that was like you said, when you lost a friend, it was very confronting with our mortality, right? I learned at 12 years old that you don't have to be old to die. And that was very, it, it's hard to even find words for it, right? It's just very
How was
profound.
your friend? Like, are you
Sorry?
comfortable sharing how your friend passed?
She was in a car accident.
Okay.
So very quick, and
Sudden.
I was out west at the time. First time I ever, my sisters are 12 and 14 years older, so they moved out by the time I was 6. So I basically was raised an only child with the luxury of having older siblings that I got to see every once in a while. So that particular summer, they paid for me to fly out west and spend 2.5 weeks with them, which was like I was on cloud nine because every other time my parents and I drove out west and it was like a whole family thing. So this time it was like, oh my God, just me and my sisters this is the best thing ever. And they lived in the interior of BC. So we were doing little day trips, going to Lake Louise and up the gondola, and I went gliding and whitewater rafting and all the things. So it was just like a fun packed vacation. And I wrote some letters to friends and talked to them on the phone a little bit. But Nicole died while I was out west. And my friend Emma wasn't allowed to tell me because they weren't going to fly me home for the funeral. So I missed all of those things. And when I got home, I remember the next morning getting ready and I wanted to run outside and go tell the neighbor, the next door neighbor, my best friend that I was home and like play and whatever. And my dad said, like he sat me down and he pulled out the obituary and was like, "Do you remember your friend? Do you remember Nicole from swimming?" And I'm like, "Of course." And told me that she had died, and I just like it just like hit me, it was like absolutely at a left field. And it was hard to navigate at the time because we didn't go to the same school, so we didn't have the same friend group. So my friends didn't know how to like navigate and really support me or what to say. So I felt really alone. I did end up connecting with a couple of mutual friends that knew her, so that was very helpful to go through the experience with other kids my age that knew her. And not to say that my friends weren't supportive, they were, but there was still like some isolation moments because they just didn't get it, right? And
When your grieving was taken away too, while everyone else was. So now a lot of people have grieved, and
yeah,
not to say that you're behind, because there is no behind, but you don't have the support of people grieving at the same time. You know what I mean? It's a little bit out of sync, which did that
yeah,
feel disjointed?
yeah. And I didn't get the closure.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'd lost, like, I'd been to a funeral or two before that, and I was like the weird kid when my great grandpa died, and I was like 5. I spent a lot of time up at the casket with the body, and some people were freaked out about that, but my mom's like, just let her be. She's not scared. If that's the way that she needs to grieve and kind of like work through it, because I was still very young, like, let her do it. That's okay. So I didn't get to have that experience. I didn't get to go to the visitation or to the funeral. And I think about a year after she passed, I went to the house for the first time, and it was bizarre, right? Because it's like she's not there, and it would have been bizarre anyway. But because I didn't get any of that type of closure with Nicole, um, like there was a memorial service, I think later on that I went to, but the actual like funeral. I wasn't there, so I missed that part. So it did feel like it kind of delayed things, or just my it didn't help my brain to kind of process and shift that worldview, right? So I struggled with that.
I'm sorry to cut you off there, but the reason that I'm asking is because our daughter's first experience with death was when my grandpa died, her
Yep,
great grandpa, and she was about 4.
yep,
And we didn't tell her at first, right? He was in
yep,
the hospital. He was in the hospital for about a week, and we knew that the pneumonia had shifted and that and I went to visit him in the hospital, but we decided not to take her to tell her. We knew she'd want to, but we thought that it would be harder for her. In hindsight, I wish we had included her more. Mind you, I think every person is different in
yeah,
how involved they want to be. We thought we were protecting her, but it prevented her from grieving in the way that she needed to and
yeah,
from having closure because she has big feelings. And so for years after that, she was mad at us. She was very mad at us for years, still grieving, not as much lately,
yeah,
because also my parents, they decided not to do a funeral and not to do any of that. They didn't tell my grandma passed, his wife, like a year and a half later. And even then it was 6 months to a year after she passed. They were just a tiny little celebration of life at the house. So there was nothing grounded in that just because family was in different spots and I think they weren't ready really
yeah.
to confront it. But I know my daughter, she really needed and wanted that. So we ended up doing our own ceremony in the backyard where because
Beautiful.
for years she still couldn't process this loss. And I didn't expect her to feel that way, but we would get photos. We went and got photos, and she wrote a note, and we burned the photo, and we burned the note, and we did all those things. And we had said a little prayer, and we created a ritual from it so that she could, because she had so many feelings about it, they would burst
Yeah,
out. It would come up at school sometimes. She'd just start crying and saying, "I miss," you know, and I'm like, you, they lived quite far away until his last like 6 months, only for 6 months. But in that time, she saw him every week.
yeah,
At age 4, seeing someone every week, that's a big part of your life. But we didn't quite, yeah, we didn't see that. Yeah, it's interesting to hear your perspective on having that process. I think as North Americans, I don't know if this is Western as well, like Western Europe, but the way I feel like that we view death, it's almost like, okay, it happened. Let's just grin and bear it, but allow
yeah,
the people on the outskirts to cry, but the people on the inner circle have to be very stoic,
yeah,
hold it in, and wear black but be tough, and then all of a sudden it just kind of like spills out a little bit after, but there's no um like we don't I feel like we don't process it.
yeah. It's like a just like a thing to it's a box to check,
Yeah.
but we're not emotionally connected to it necessarily. And there's something to say that's very, I find very valuable in getting people together to have that community and that kind of collective expression of grief. But the like they're in the ground 3 days after they die kind of thing is like, I appreciate that it's more common now to have a little bit of like breathing room and do a celebration maybe a little bit further down.
Well, you can't even process the death before you have, or the loss or the change before you're planning. And that's a highly
It's
stressful.
just so chaotic.
Yeah.
And I was really glad that with my dad, we did a celebration of life about 8 weeks after, and it gave me time to just like take a breath and um write his eulogy and write his obituary. I wouldn't have been able to do that the day after he died if there was going to be a funeral 2 days like what? You know?
Yeah.
And because it just depends on the circumstance, but it's sometimes it's sudden, and even when it's not, it still can feel sudden. And like Eric and I got married 2 days before he died. It was the most dysregulating time of my life. I'm still processing it, and a lot of it still feels um like a piece of like a piece of luggage that's pushed back in the corner of a closet that I'm just not quite ready to open. And
Well, there's
um
so much in there. As soon as you open it up, it just, you know?
and there's fear around it because there's big feelings,
Yeah.
right? So it
Yeah.
can be hard to unpack, but kind of moving back to where I was going when Nicole died, I think just because of the age and I don't even know what led me, but I made a promise to her right off the bat. I promised her that I would live twice as big for both of us because like now I was earth side and she was spirit realm, and she was kind of my twin soul. We were two peas in a pod. And so I made that promise to her. So that helped me on my grief journey because it gave me kind of hope or something to it gave me meaning and purpose.
Mm.
And and then like 2 years later, so during for Nicole's death, I very much connected with my childhood kitty because you know how animals are just that unconditional love, right? So Chrissy was that for me when no one else understood it. Because even my parents, like they were out of their element. My dad had lost his dad when he was 18, but like we're talking to a 12-year-old who just lost a friend. That's just, and she was born the day after me. So that's, every birthday is just a reminder of another age she won't be Earthside. And um, so
And it was an
Chrissy,
accident that could have happened to anyone. Like
that's right.
it wasn't
Could
a
have been
bump,
me.
it wasn't a, you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah.
Very. Yeah.
So I leaned into Chrissy, and then 2 years later she died of cancer. And then 2 years after that, my grandpa, who I was very close with, died. And I just found myself kind of sinking in. And I remember coming home from school and just watching the movie. I don't know if you've ever seen it, What Dreams May Come with Robin Williams. It's my
Oh
favorite movie of all time. And
my God.
it gave me like I would just go into my room and on that like small little TV with the like probably had it on VHS, and I would just cry. I would cry myself to sleep after school, and I'd watch it like every day. So I really
Like to
sunk
cry.
into
That's the movie. I watched it for the first time with Matt a few months into dating, right? Not
yeah,
he's like, we should watch this movie. I was mad at him afterwards. I was like, I can't believe you made me watch that movie. I bawled the whole
it
movie.
is so
And I think
beautiful.
for hours after that, I couldn't stop crying because it was
Yeah,
just so impactful and like,
yeah,
oh. So fair warning, anyone that hasn't watched it, if you watch it, it's a wonderful movie, but bring Kleenex, be prepared to not do anything afterwards and for it to bring like everything up.
it
Because
does. It
wow.
really does. And so
But imagine
that was,
watching that as a kid. I can't imagine being a kid watching that. Not that it's bad, but it
yeah,
is so intense. But it's probably helping you process a lot of those
it did.
feelings.
It did. So by the time, so when I was watching that on repeat, I was like 16 by that time. And poetry. Actually, one of the things that I leaned into after Nicole died was poetry. I started journaling, just daily thoughts, and poems. I started writing poems. That was a way for me to kind of express my emotions because I wasn't always able to really articulate it because not everyone understood. So I was able to put it in writing, and that was how I released my emotions. And yeah, so poetry was a season, and writing and watching that movie on repeat. Um, so these are things that didn't haven't necessarily always like followed through with every experience, but they've served me when they needed to. And one thing that I've become aware of, and I know you understand like survival patterns and stuff, but I think it was really prevalent when my grandpa died because I really kind of sunk into a deep place and just didn't have that spark of life. And it's kind of it that one did follow me through. So it kind of became the default for when I'm going through a difficult time is to kind of like stop moving, stop living, sleeping a lot.
Mhm.
And while it is a coping mechanism and it helps you to survive that chapter, I also became mindful of like I have to be a little bit careful on the edge of that because it's very easy to just fall into the abyss. And that's what happened after my dad died and all of the aftermath with the family. I find the family stuff actually was probably just in conjunction with it, the worst, I don't know, maybe not the worst part, but because obviously losing my dad was horrendous, but um it really